again.
Actually,
Um,
Peter,
yes.
just one thing I thought, no, I should tell people who are attending online, because we we are not able to have much interaction, those who are attending online, but you can definitely put your questions and send it to this email from where you are receiving all this information. Then we would like to take it up during the question answer session.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. While we're waiting for the presentation to come on the screen, this morning I was having lunch in the guest house, or breakfast actually, and there was a guy coming in, sitting right opposite me, and he said, "So what are you here for?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually doing a Gian course on frugal innovation." And he said, "Frugal, that's a nice word. We should do more of that in the world." And I thought, wow, this is a difference with how we ended yesterday, perhaps, that we had all these sort of doubts, and is this the right thing, and how to move forward. So I started interrogating him. He is from Canada. He's a professor in linguistics. And that reminded me of our discussion yesterday of the importance of language. That I started to ask him about, so why do you feel so positive and optimistic about this word frugal? And he started to explain about sustainable and circular and moving beyond consumerism, etc. And then I asked him, do you think it's likely that this will happen in India? And he looked at me and he said, well, maybe not tomorrow, maybe it will take some time. And then we had an interesting discussion, two Westerners at this breakfast table here in the guest house, saying that it's actually our fault, that maybe because of colonialism and all the history that the West got rich, spent its money, became consumerist, started to destroy the world, and now we are telling other people, like here in India, that you shouldn't consume so much, you should be more frugal. So this is not a very convincing argument coming from somebody like me and this Canadian colleague of mine. But at the same time, of course, the story has to be told, whichever history we bring to the table. Right, so that in terms of getting the PowerPoint on the screen. But I thought it was an important connection to make. Now, I wanted to start with, again, something that was mentioned yesterday. I mentioned at some point that there was this article in Nature where they said that frugal has been ignored and we should do more. And I could see a number of faces going like, well, yeah, maybe. So I thought I will look up the quote, and here it is. So it is the editorial of December 2023 of Nature, and the heading is Frugal Innovation, a low-cost option for technology. Well, maybe not the most sophisticated way of describing it, but, and then the other heading is Science is starting to recognize the movement to create mass market products using local knowledge and materials. What I want to draw your attention to is the conclusion of that editorial, the last two sentences. First saying, researchers have used their ingenuity and skills to create and test a quality, low-cost product that has the potential to benefit a huge number of people. Talking about frugal innovation researchers. It is an approach that policymakers, scientists, and journal editors, so they're talking about themselves, have neglected. And then they make a little language joke, in a sense. They say it's time not to just make do, but to make amends. And why is this also a bit of a language joke? Very often with frugal innovation, they say it's a make-do kind of approach. And they say, well, not just to make do, but to make amends. We have ignored this, and we shouldn't have. We should have taken this serious from the start. So I hope with this I have convinced you that Nature has actually published this. The editors themselves have said this. Whether they will live up to this, we will have to see in the coming years, because then, like Vibhuti was saying yesterday, the journals in which lots of frugal innovation stuff is published, maybe in a few years we can say Nature is on that list. At least they have given us now the opening. Yeah? So when we send in our paper next, we can refer to this editorial. Yeah? I would say the first sentence in your abstract is something like, as the editorial in Nature of 2023 says, this is what we need to focus on more. Okay, so enough promotion. Let's go to the content for this session. And it's a session on terminology around this quadruple helix, the triple helix, and beyond. Because I will end with showing you some people that have gone from 3 to 4 to 5. Because triple helix basically means three actors. Quadruple helix is 4. And then there's also a Latin word for 5 that will come later. Now, the scope of this is that so far, most studies that have used this model of this interaction between different actors, they focus on the formal sector. So they focus on corporate sector industries. They don't focus on the tea stall around the corner. Yeah? They focus on traditional universities, not a vocational training institute. And they focus on the government, and the government by definition is formal. Or at least they should be operating formally. And it is about their knowledge interactions between these partners. And the nice thing with Vibhuti's example that will come after this lecture is that it extends this discussion to the informal sector. Yeah, but the reality is that 99 out of 100 papers and books on this topic are about formal sector actors. And it's only just beginning to happen that the informal sector operators get a space in this discussion. Now, what is the basic idea in these multi-actor collaboration and interaction models? The basic idea is that innovations don't take place by an individual only, an entrepreneur or a technician, but you want to move towards a system that nurtures innovations. And for that you need different kind of actors to collaborate. Yeah, that's the basic idea. And in the background of this idea, that's very important if you look at the literature, is that most of the literature from North America, so the United States of America, and Trump is maybe an example that we don't want to talk about today, is about individual heroes thinking. Yeah? Steve Jobs started Apple. Bill Gates started Microsoft. Well, no. They are just the individuals that in the end came out on top. But they did it together with many other people. But in the American history, always the winner takes all. And the story that we get, the history that we consume is, oh wow, it's Elon Musk. And he has done all these things. And now he's turned into a bad guy maybe, but previously we lauded him for having electrical cars and etc. In the European experience, the focus on innovation is much more on the collective and on bringing different kinds of actors together to invent something new. Now, as you know from yesterday, I'm part of that European tradition, so it's not a coincidence that I will talk about all these helixes and their combinations. But it's an important difference to keep in mind. If you read sort of management journals, especially American management journals, you still often find that these stories about that individual hero that they want to explain. Actually, I was in Agra this weekend, before coming here. And as you know, I did my PhD there, so I know a few people. And we went to the main bookstore in Agra. And that bookstore is now selling a biography of one of the sort of, well, he calls himself an iconic entrepreneur in the footwear industry in Agra, a guy called Davar. And he has asked somebody to write his biography. He is now a philanthropist. So he helps students from different backgrounds to start up businesses, and he invests in them. And his son nowadays runs the shoe factories that are still exporting lots of shoes to Europe. But it's that kind of individual imaging next to, in that same bookstore on that shelf with Davar. On the next one was the biography of Mr. Tata. Same sort of history, Americanized kind of thinking about individual heroes. And this triple, quadruple helix stuff is all about the other side of the coin. Yeah? Okay. Good. So this is what a triple helix looks like. Industry, government, academia. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when I started to prepare for this, I just Googled images, triple helix, and you get hundreds of these. And sometimes industry is on top, or academia, or government. Doesn't really matter. Who is on top here is not a hierarchy. It's sort of about, these are different actors. What I thought was interesting about this one is that they focused on that if the three work together effectively, they can achieve competitiveness and regional development for a particular area, for example. Yeah, this is the basic idea. Let's see, I think I have another one. Yeah. Oh, this is already the quadruple. And that's it, is when people or civil society starts coming in. Because that was ignored in the first 20 years of triple helix studies. People were very proud that they actually worked together with the government, with academia, with industry. And they completely forgot about civil society, NGOs, movements, etc. Now, when we move towards, let's say, the topic that Vibhuti will talk about more after this, this is a way to get closer to the ground, in a sense, to the grassroots, to making sure that the interests of normal people are also included in what's going on. Because the idea here is, like with user-driven innovation kind of approaches, that the needs of people are more central and are actually not only at the beginning of the process, but are interactively included in the design, in the prototyping, in the testing, and eventually also in the actual production processes. Still here, for example, they say higher education. You can ask the question, why only higher? Well, I don't know exactly from which article I copied this. So I don't know why they put here higher. You could just put education. Yeah, because mid-level education or vocational training might be equally important for getting things moving, especially if you want to get closer to the grassroots. Then I'm now going to turn to the Netherlands. This is what we call the Dutch diamond. It's not very clear, but it is a quadruple helix. Yeah. Here you see government, knowledge institution, civil society organizations, and business or industry. So it's the same set of actors. And it's called the Dutch diamond because the Dutch think, and I'm now going to talk not as if I'm not as we, sort of, but I will be the outside academic looking at what the Netherlands thinks of itself. Yeah, the Dutch see themselves as being especially successful in executing this quadruple helix. And what the Dutch have been quite good at is convincing other countries that they are good at this. So it has become an export product of the Netherlands. Yeah? Dutch consultants go to France, to Italy, to Germany, to the US sometimes, also sometimes to India, but not very successfully, for as far as I have seen, in trying to promote the ideas of this model, often forgetting the history of how you get to such a situation, and the history of how do these actors, how have they interacted before. Yeah? But there is a story of why in the Netherlands there was at least a time, and this was the sort of, my early career days in a sense. It was since the 1970s, 80s that the Dutch became well known for this. Now it is sort of withering away, and I will explain a little bit about why in a minute. Because I want to now do a Dutch tale story in between, even though this is scheduled for tomorrow. But I thought it would be good to give a bit of context of why this is seen as a successful model. And then tomorrow I can give more detailed example about specific sectors, how they did it. But if you try to generalize the story, it is about tightly knit clusters of family businesses in a couple of sectors like agro-food, water, civil engineering. Why did it work so well? Because these were relatively homogeneous religious and cultural communities at the start. So there are all these famous stories, for example, that the guy working for the local government and the guy having a business and the person who was head of the main NGO and the person who was sort of working with the university, they would all come to the same church. They would, after church, go to the same bar. In many cases, actually, they would be cousins or father and son. Yeah, so there would be all these kinds of connections because it was a tightly knit community. Nevertheless, there were lots of struggles because you have different interests if you represent the government or business or an NGO. But they were able to overcome these differences because of these relatively more homogeneous backgrounds. In a period after the Second World War when the Netherlands was still a relatively poor country. But there was an enormous growth, partly because of the support from the Americans after the Second World War, the Marshall Plan, in making great investments in a small country like the Netherlands, where suddenly everything was possible. So people could easily overcome their differences and sort of grow together. Many of these success stories, for example in agro-food, are based on tacit knowledge, on things that are difficult to copy initially. And these businesses became sort of global leaders in skill-intensive niches beyond production. Now, what does that mean? For example, in agro-food, the 5 biggest companies in the world for the seeds for vegetables are all Dutch. And they are from 5 different small towns within 20 kilometers in the Netherlands, from 5 sort of family businesses that have grown into doing that while nobody was yet interested. And they have developed a skill, and they now have offices across the world, and they compete with each other, but they also feel that they want to keep out the Chinese, for example, or the Indians, or who else wants to get into that sector. Yeah? And that is part of the explanation of that success story. Another example is glass houses. You know, glass houses for growing tomatoes or other vegetables. In the Netherlands, of course, the climate is such that you can't grow these vegetables in the open air. So you need glass houses, and you need to regulate temperatures and sun and light and all sorts of things. Greenhouses, yeah. Okay, you call it greenhouses, yeah. Okay, we call it glass houses, don't ask me why. So greenhouses. The most advanced companies in the world for greenhouses are Dutch companies who are now struggling with the Chinese competition, who are building sort of a frugal version of what the Dutch are famous for, and are trying to flood the market with these other kinds of greenhouses. Yeah? Okay, so that's part of that story. Now they are struggling a lot with sustainability challenges. I will talk about that more tomorrow, maybe that's better. And there is an issue of migrant labor exploitation in the Netherlands itself with these greenhouses and other sorts of activities. Because while it is high-end, there is also a lot of cheap labor involved. And the Dutch have become too rich to want to do these sorts of jobs. So they get people from Romania, Bulgaria, increasingly also from the Philippines and other places in Asia, Africa, for these kinds of jobs. And there is increasing protest against this in the Netherlands itself, that we shouldn't be doing this. And rightly so, we shouldn't be doing this, obviously. Okay, so that's a little bit of the Dutch history in a 5-minute frame. To explain why we have become, now I said we after all, we have become the exporters of the quadruple helix model. Now this is one other picture of a quadruple helix model. Of course, you can make as many arrows here as you want. Depends on the topic of your research. I guess Vibhuti will show us some of this maybe on how it worked in their particular case study. And then finally, the 5th level is the quintuple helix. I don't know actually why they use these Latin terms. It sounds more fancy maybe, or complicated, or more academic perhaps. So quintuple helix means you also include the environment, the natural environment. It means that the natural capital on which society needs to flourish is also, should be considered an actor in this. So what are the rights of trees or rivers of not being polluted or not being cut down? And how do we include that in giving weight to the different interests in our society? And I was thinking this morning when I finalized this presentation, and I thought, so what would be number 6? And I was frightened a bit about whether maybe the AI kind of thing might be the next level, but then AI is done by people after all. So maybe it's extraterrestrials that are coming to dominate our planet? Aliens. Okay, well.
But don't you think this addition of layers is happening because like triple regeneration? There's this concept that Raju mentioned at a particular conference, that people, places, and the planet, and the fact that there is a restoration and a regeneration. So I don't know which of these dimensions is specifically answer to say restoration or regeneration.
Yeah.
But in a sense, probably this would be something in reaction to which at least the morphological aspects are being added.
Yes, yes. And at the same time, one might argue that we are a little bit late in including nature here. Why haven't we done this at the very beginning? Or shouldn't it be perhaps at the center? So I just came across this picture. It's not yet a big literature, but it is starting to happen. Yeah, and I was looking for Helix, so I got all these different variations, and I wanted to show it to you to make clear that this is a dynamic field, that these things are not cast in stone, and people will continue to play around with it. And I agree with your point. And there will be more discussion on this in the coming years again. And it may well be that the original triple helix perhaps would go out of the center. In essence, we decide what we put where. None of this is fixed. So if you would want to do a PhD on reinventing the helix with whatever number you have come up with, it's possible, but you would have to defend your new approach versus the conventional wisdom of it has grown from 3 to 4 to now maybe 5. And in that sense, coming back to the frugal innovation discourse, it is like with frugal innovation, we have to show how we are different, but we also then have to be solid in making clear to the conventional innovation studies literature what it is that actually we add to that more fundamentally. Or is there a fundamental addition to that literature? I think that, no, that's not it. There is one more slide. And that is the connection back to the knowledge interactions, of course. The quadruple helix, therefore, is about multi-actor interactions, but, and I put that in red here, I mentioned it yesterday also, it's about often unequal relationships. Yeah? And we have to keep that in mind. Because the role of trust and power in such relationships is of crucial importance in understanding what is going on and who is driving what. And if you go back to this one, it's clear that at the moment, the natural environment is not driving the story. And there are very few people with power who would defend and promote the stake of the natural environment in these kind of activities. And when you include the informal sector, or even put them central, like in the case study that we will do after the break, you can ask yourself questions like, what kind of knowledge interactions will help identifying and developing scalable frugal innovations, and how to blend them in with what is happening beyond these new innovations. So how can they become embedded in the local economic, social, cultural, political, religious environment? And with that, I hope I have laid the groundwork for Bibhuti's interesting case study, so that you are ready to dive into that. Am I right that there is a break, or are we?
There is a break.
There is a break, good. Unless maybe there are 1 or 2 questions before the break, or we first have tea or coffee and we think of questions and we do them after the break. It's up to you. Is there a burning question now in the sense of something not being clear? The word burning doesn't, yes.
The point you mentioned that regarding the labor that they,
Yeah.
migrant labor. So the only thing is that they don't want migrant labor to come. Is it because of the tacit knowledge they don't want to transfer it? Could that be one factor?
That is also a factor, that this tacit knowledge may leak out of the cluster. Yeah, we would have to go in a bit more detail. This tacit knowledge is more in the skill-intensive dimensions, while the migrant laborers are actually doing the picking of the vegetables and stuff like that. But still, they are in the same building, sort of, in the same greenhouse. they start picking up what these people are talking about. They learn the language, they learn some of the tricks. And yes, before you know it, they may go back to Romania and start their own business. And who knows? You may create your own new competitor. Yeah. There's also the right-wing political issues around migrants in the Netherlands, etc. So it's a messy issue, but the secrecy issue is definitely also a case in point. Yeah? One thing I didn't say about these tight families is that we're talking here about the Netherlands in a period in history 30, 40 years ago where most families had 8 or 9 children. Yeah? Nowadays everybody thinks that in Europe families are only 1 or 2, 3 children. But in these clusters, which were quite religious also, 8, 9, 10 children were quite normal. So then you can populate your family business quite effectively in your own community. And you can keep out these sort of evil eyes or outsiders perspectives. But of course, once you grow and you become global, you can't have a nephew in every affiliate across the world. Because these seed people, for example, I think they are in 40 out of the 54 countries in Africa. They have an office in the capital. Yeah? And any farmer in Kenya would know the name of that company. Yeah? So these are really sort of household names in such a sector. So there's a tension there. Yeah? How do you maintain that tightness, and how do you become a global player? And it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to maintain that.
So they choose their scale of operation.
Yes,
they choose their scale.
Yeah, they've become maybe a bit greedy at some point, and they scaled a bit more than what would fit their business model, if you want to put it in that terminology. So they've outstretched, probably too much, and now they can't pull it back in. And that is a great frustration, especially for the retired CEOs, so to speak, of these families, who are seeing that their sons and daughters are losing their grip on the business.
Have you studied Indian family businesses as well? Because whatever characteristics you have mentioned,
Yeah.
those are there in Indian family businesses as well.
Yeah.
It will take like 100 years or 200 years to caste-based family businesses, which are niche skilled and are not allowed. Even women were not taught because they will eventually go to other families.
Yeah.
That has been the scenario. Like it all depended on tacit knowledge. So
Yeah.
I understand that Dutch Diamond it worked properly, maybe better than others, but same is the situation in India and maybe in some other Asian countries too.
Yeah.
Japan too
Yeah.
had similar scenario.
I actually have studied family businesses in India, but I thought it would be a bit too much for me to talk to you about family business in India. So I thought I would leave that for the moment, and I would leave it to Saradindu and maybe to Bibhuti to talk about that, and I could add on to this. But what strikes me indeed, so thank you for making the comment, that the similarities are striking. Yeah? It's all temporal. These things are not forever. Because also the Birlas and the Mahindras and the Tatas, etc., they are probably losing grip at some point. And there are also differences in terms of scaling and in terms of the importance of the relation with the government, etc. But there are also indeed striking differences. I have done quite a lot of work in Indonesia on this. Same story. Well, no, that would be too simple. That's a shortcut. It's not the same story, but the similarities are striking in terms of the importance of family, of local connections, combined with religion, culture, or caste in the case of India, and in the case of Indonesia, different segments within different religions. and whether or not you were part of the Communist Party in the revolution in the early 1960s or not, which was also a dividing line kind of culturally. So yes, but well, I explained why I didn't make the connection on purpose.
But then the question is, do you think these Indian family businesses can also be put under the quadruple Helix structure?
Yeah, that I'm wondering. Not a bit less perhaps.
But then even the fact that they did not specialize, right? You have a Reliance and you have a Tata conglomerate style functioning, but you do not have them doing specialized activities
That's the
in
point.
the first
And
place. So
maybe
Yeah.
it's also a problem of the incentive to do those things. Family run businesses tend to have run on particular principles which, though may be grounded in the community, but are more
global
generalized.
conglomerates like Adani, Ambani.
Essentially,
I am
I'm
also
talking
talking
about
about
smaller
Indian
ones.
smaller.
Yeah, small and medium scale family business. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no, but yeah.
Yeah, for example, my work in Agra on the shoe business, yeah, there were, let's say, 25 families that were basically running the show in the footwear sector, having their sons and cousins running different units, etc., etc., and having the key contacts with importers from abroad. So yes, these were sort of small, medium businesses at the time. My example of this biography of Mr. Dawar, when I did my PhD in the early 1990s, he just had one factory which was maybe twice the size of this room. Yeah, and now he is a celebrated hero. And when, let's say, 10 years after my PhD, I still did research on shoes. Don't ask me why, it's a long story. And I went with a colleague to the shoe fair in Germany, which is the biggest shoe fair in the world every year, where all the big importers and exporters come. And there he was. But at that time, just with a suitcase with samples, because he couldn't afford a stall as yet. Again, 10 years later, Agra had a stall, and he was the key person representing the shoe industry of that city. So this is, these sort of family businesses, sort of small-time conglomerates, if you can call it that.
Even the scale at which he is referring, means like I would only see the problem compound. Like, when you have bigger entities not being able to attempt specialized activities.
Yeah.
My basic point was only to the limited extent that more,
Yeah.
Sort of cohesive,
The-
deformed units are not able to attempt something, then we cannot make a similar expectation from something which is more under-resourced, if I may say.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
actually, that was my point. I mean, can you really put it in a quadruple helix context, in the sense where there is a knowledge interaction happening between, say, the research institutes and these companies and so on? Even if it might be in place, but we probably haven't done a good amount of research to capture that. What is the form of that interaction?
Well, that reminds me of that work from the 1990s is maybe still relevant indeed. The Agra shoe sector in the early 1990s, they worked with a number of local training institutes, not a university, but they did work very closely together with some local government officials, so Agra and UP level bureaucrats who would help them get subsidies from Delhi. This is the way they put it in those days to me. And they had intensive relationships with training institutes at the local level, all of them more practically oriented, skills for different types of operations in producing shoes. And the entrepreneurs complaining to the training institutes that they would all train people on a particular kind of shoes, but that kind of shoe was not in fashion anymore. They needed something else, and why didn't these training institutes make a move? And then I remember a meeting where the training institute said, well, if you pay the machines for us so that we can teach it, and then they found a way to do that. So it's at least a triple helix. I don't think there was any NGO, civil society kind of connection with the shoe industry in those days. But yeah, so you could put it in those terms if you include the more or the less formal part of it.
I think that is very similar to some of the instances I have observed in the lock and key industry, whether in Tamil Nadu or in Aligarh. The interactions are more at a local level, and I mean, people also have very critical understanding of what these training institutes do and don't do. Like, in his case, why they are not training them on the models or designs which are more up to date. In case of lock and key, it was about whether they can, the machines that are used by the training institutes are costly, and they cannot do the same thing in their own workshop, because those machines are not easily available. And so there is an incompatibility between what they do at their workshop and what they get the training at the training institutes.
But can't those training institutes take them as their models and create something more suitable for the industry? Because I don't think so
These-
that those models,
yeah.
I know that those are some ancient models, but if they are still working, so that can also be taken as something to look after.
Of course, it should. It should. I found one such experiment in Dindigul in Tamil Nadu, and what they are trying to do, the Dindigul locks are very sturdy locks. They are handmade locks. Okay, whereas Aligarh has more sort of automated, structure, production structures, and they were trying to combine the two, which would have the authenticity of the Dindigul handmade locks with the look and design and aesthetics of Aligarh. And there are some, local level government institutes which are trying to achieve that. Triple or quadruple helix it is. Yeah. But what, Shobinda, you please. No, I mean, I just had to make that point, and probably there is a touch of quadruple helix there, because there was this government institute which is trying and developing these associations between Dindigul lock manufacturers and Aligarh lock manufacturers, and trying to come up with a model which would be viable to produce such products. But yeah, very sort of sporadic instances, at least what I have observed. Shominda, you?
It's very nice to listen to you. This is my first exposure to your work and even following you. So the first observation is, when you are referring to higher education as education, in the Government of India policy now, the schools are being treated as the centers for innovation. So a lot of initiatives have been taken for authority intervention.
Yes.
And the startups are being, so the innovation is being now brought to the level of the education.
Okay.
There are articles in Indian Express and quite a bit of literature is there. Second is, for a country like India, the civil society is highly heterogeneous and dispersed.
Yes.
It's also layered.
Yeah.
So when you are looking at the industry, particular sector, the imperfectness of the competition, and particularly when I'm looking at the higher education in the academia, here also we are highly heterogeneous. We have typical research intensive university, then teaching intensive university, then degree granting colleges. Now, I was thinking that because of the heavy impact of ranking and our propensity to publish in high impact factor journals, we have moved towards high cost research all the time. So we're trying to locate our research problem within the literature survey, trying to publish in the best of the journals, particularly the science community. Now, outreach activity gets delegated in the process. How do you connect? Because all the time you're thinking in terms of the possibility of a paper publication.
Yeah.
This is an uncertain terrain, whether it has got the potential, how it will work out, because you have to take the risk. So I'm thinking that somebody has to take the initiative within the overarching government policy framework, that how to tap the potential of the civil society and rope them in so that we can really realize the potential. And so I'm just thinking about how sector-wise, Sarojini is giving a couple of examples. Industry initiative, the university initiative, or the research can take place within industry and academia, maybe slightly in the process. So to have a range of stories, depending on the sector that we are talking about.
No,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember a colleague of mine, I mean, he is now retired, and he, towards the end of his sort of career, he was supervising a PhD student on these clusters, lock and key clusters or another cluster, I don't remember. And one of the key findings apparently came from that study is the universities are not reaching out to the local manufacturing processes. And ironically, I had the same, I would say maybe same experience. I remember having visited Roorkee a few months ago, and we were having this ganna juice, and the carts which were carrying these machines, it's an all utility kind of a cart. You can have the machine, you can have also maybe a provision where the person can take rest, sleep, and there is of course a car attached to it. It can be driven long distances. And I just asked them, so maybe IIT Roorkee has helped them design it or develop it. I'm provoking now Vibhuti to come back and and talk more about it. And they almost all, I spoke to 3-4 people, they flatly refused. No, this is all what we have done. Now whether this is a pattern or there is something happening which we are not able to capture. Maybe it is happening through a more informal mechanisms and routes, and not really as a kind of an official endeavor to reach out to these people, is something we also don't have much information about. But on the surface it looks like as if there is not much happening, not much interaction happening in a very official level. And that is true for JNU maybe also. I mean, we do not have much interaction with people living outside the campus. So to what extent Quadruple Helix can help us reach out to these sections and internalize that in our research programs maybe would be an exercise in itself.
Sir, there is also something like some of the sectors that I can give example of forensic science as a sector,
Yes.
which is almost entirely dependent on government, or it's like under government. So in that case, triple helix or quadruple helix is not so well defined in such sectors, and then innovations in such sectors wouldn't confine to the traditional definition of what we are calling quadruple helix, because
Yeah. So the question is,
there's a defined line.
can an informal person help the forensic institutes to better their technique? Are there examples?
Sir, so there are some techniques. Let's say a test for blood. Let's say
Right.
I do not want to specify.
Right.
But let's say some test for blood, which has been discovered by a common person, and then it kind of got incorporated in a formal investigation
Right.
for purpose of analysis of blood samples, in the formal protocol. Something like that, incorporation of these tests, or a scientist working in pure sciences, eventually coming up with an idea of using nanotech particles to detect drugs, and then use of that technology in protocols.
But and in your sector, I think courtroom will have a role to play. So if you can say the courtroom is kind of a representative of the public, the civil society or whatever, then I think a lot of knowledge comes via the courtroom, through the deliberations, court proceedings, new kinds of knowledge being talked about.
So in that, the quadruple helix would
I mean,
include.
in my improvised thought, I don't know. I mean, but
Thinking aloud.
Even in
Yes.
the case
Thinking
of the
aloud,
leather industry, like there was this professor in the Indian Institute of Science that was way back in 2019 during a workshop. He mentioned that he did something with the tanning procedure in order to make it less polluting. Since Chennai is a big cluster for leather, apparently he also made certain attributions that in terms of the social structure, it reduced domestic violence on women because the husbands who were involved in the tanning process were somehow used or given to drinking because of the environment in which they were staying. So that kind of initiatives may have been very scientific led at the level because the individual in question was a scientist. He went on to become a technocrat in the government of India. So in a sense, he carried forward his experience with a small activity, what he managed to do as a scientist, and then probably encourage the idea that this kind of interactions could actually take place.
But I'm also inclined to ask question to all of you and get your feedback on something like this. That we are talking about industry as if industry is very homogeneous. Industry actors, people who are working within the industry are very homogeneous, but they are not. And there is a question of labor working with the technology, and the owner. I mean, let me not get into capitalist narrative, but an owner employing a technology, and they may not have the same interest from that technology. And where is the question of then interactions, and what is the scope of interactions, for whose benefits the technology should be employed? And I'm asking this question because only a week ago we were discussing with another researcher that what is happening now in Indian mining industry across the board, all kinds of mining, that the health hazards of the technology and the production process is being completely ignored, and nobody is taking it up. But people are dying at a young age. And the questions that we were discussing and trying to sort of develop a proposal around was how should we, what kind of a research thematic is important here? To what extent, the role of labor organizations are to be understood or looked at or investigated, because we have civil society, but then why the civil societies are not taking enough interest in seeing that that the health hazards are reduced. So even industry is not a very homogeneous body. And so, I mean, there are layers of actors even within the quadruple helix. I mean, one of the simplification or oversimplification maybe that this structure is doing is to see industry as a kind of an heterogeneous body, which it is not, definitely.
Yeah, it's a sort of an analytical model.
Right.
And it hides more than it reveals, perhaps, but it reveals the importance of knowledge interactions and of these things across the fence. But inside these boxes, there are many differences, and of course, indeed, civil society, for example, in India is very heterogeneous. And it's also sort of, not very much teaming up into forming a counter force, but then also the industry, the private sector in India is also very heterogeneous. And in that sense, of course, the comparison with a country like the Netherlands, there we have the sort of differences, because that in a country like the Netherlands, I mean, the whole of the Netherlands now has about as many people as the city of Delhi. So we're talking about a different scale of activities, obviously, where we also talk about heterogeneity, because some of these communities are Protestant and others were Catholic, and they wouldn't talk to each other. Yeah, and then, for example, in the Netherlands, the Protestant Union people wouldn't talk with the Catholic Union people, but they would talk with the Protestant Employers Union or Employers Association, and so there would be other kinds of ways in which people would come together than what one would expect if you would have a homogeneous kind of society. But I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Yes.
But I think all it says that empirical research is more important to do. I mean, to understand these layers and the complexities.
Maybe one final statement, which I'm now reminded of. I spoke with one of these persons from a seed company. So he was sort of, one of the power holders in that Dutch diamond. And I talked to him about this, and he said, "Dutch diamond? What is that?" Yeah. So for him, as being treated by all the outsiders as a sort of a key actor in this construct, for him it didn't mean anything. And he was part of this mission with the royal family in India a couple of years ago. So maybe he was joking to me, but I think in any case he also wanted to make the point that these consultants and other researchers, they talk about these things. I just do my job. I have my business. We do the things we do in the way that we do them. And he doesn't make much of it in that sense. For him it's normal business to have good contacts in government, to work with the union, to work with people in civil society, and to work with university people as long as they are not crazy theory people, in his terminology. So after 5 minutes he said to me, for a university person, I can talk to you. So, so that tells you more about their environment. Anyway, that's
Since you mentioned about these firms like starting with their frugal innovations and getting big across the world, I just wanted to know what is the temporal aspect of how you are defining them as frugal innovations. Like at one point you have to say that it is there might be another effective, better solution to it eventually. So then it's not frugal anymore, the previous one that we are looking into, because there is some temporality.
Absolutely.
To how we are looking at it.
No, when they became global players, they unlearned the frugal part of their business, absolutely. And they became the high-end suppliers of agricultural companies across the world. And they are now struggling to fight with the competition from China, for example, who is trying to sort of make a cheaper, more functional variation with cheaper materials to the greenhouses or the seeds that they have in the market. Now, I think the Netherlands is a very good example of a company that has unlearned being frugal, and that would now be on the list of for us. But that's almost like preaching, that we say you should become more frugal again.
So since you mentioned about the linguist thing, I was also going through kind of a bit of text yesterday. And then I found out that frugal, the word itself comes from frugalis, which is the Latin for thrifting. But it in turn comes from frux, which means, like Old Latin means
Fruitful.
So, which is basically how you mentioned in your lecture that we have to think of it as a positive thing. And people in the past, in ancient world, were thinking of it in a positive, with a positive attitude. Like it's a fruit, it's something
it's fruitful,
that you have to do in order to have a better life. So,
well, actually, the association between frugality and the thrift is merely a 100-year-old construct, and it was sort of, if I remember, the argument that we make in a paper with Shekhar. So after the Great Depression, people started denouncing that because because being thrifty was not seen as a virtue, because more consumption will drive economic growth and will help the economies coming out of depression, demand deficiency. So thrift, an association between thrift, frugality, and giving frugality a bad kind of an image is sort of more of a phenomena of the last 100 years. And even thrift was maybe, thrift was there for 70, 80 years before that time. But even before that, if you go back to 250 years and look at, say, for example, that's why we talked about Adam Smith and his book. Their frugality had a very different understanding and a very different meaning.
It perhaps always had a connotation with religious.
Well, on that also we had written something in the paper, if I remember, and we argued that Smith was the person who sort of secularized the term frugality, because in his book there was no association between frugality and religion. So those associations were pre-Adam Smith time, connection. Yeah. So.
We're talking about the quadruple helix. Is there a role of the court or the law interpreting bodies in a quadruple helix? What are the industries doing? So something wrong, for example, done on the part of the industry side, for example, you say, because there is a case of we talk about the this Lehveri case.
Sivathorn, yeah.
Sivathorn case. So the industry come up. I mean, the one of the important company was there. So what he done? He made fraudulent means to earn more and more money out of the local business in Ladakh. So there was no role of the court or the law interpreting bodies. As I have been researching into this Sivathorn industry in Ladakh. So my question is, don't we have any role in quadruple helix for the law interpreting bodies or court use, I suppose, just to make check and balances?
Yeah. Well, I know you're already doing a PhD, or you've more or less finished one, but bringing the law and the courts in to this framework could be a PhD kind of topic, yes. So I would say yes, but apparently in the existing sort of studies that as they have been done, nobody has felt the need to single them out as a separate category. I think they would be seen as being part of state.
Regulation.
Or society.
Regulation.
But if you would do a case study in which court rulings would become an essential part of how the economy functions, then then you don't have 5, but you have 6. If you keep nature, then the courts could be, or the law, however you want to frame it.
Or maybe we can count the court part within a government sector itself.
Well, all of this is possible. Let me put it this way: it's a construct. So what you want to use it for is that it brings out your story in the best possible way. If you need separate attention for the court and the law, then you give it its own name and label in that system, and you have another blurb. Apparently, so far, nobody has felt that urgent need to give it a separate, visible place.
Yeah, in this structure.
Yeah, in this structure. But that tells us something about maybe the kind of sectors that they have looked at, the kind of economies that they have focused on, and the fact that they focused on formal sector businesses, primarily in Western economies.
Yeah.
One of our participants joining online has posted a
Comment, okay.
Yeah. So she's saying that in the Indian context, then, are we not going back to the traditional knowledge systems or the Indian knowledge systems for almost everything now, in the current scenario? So how do we put this or position this particular trend within this entire discussion of the quadruple helix?
Going back to traditional knowledge, and so so you want to seek traditional knowledge as a source of knowledge. So you are talking about knowledge interactions, and earlier we were taking university or the educational institutions as the only source of knowledge, technical knowledge. Now probably you are saying that okay, the traditional knowledge is also a credible source of knowledge, and maybe much of it is not happening within a university system. And in that case, I would say the public represents that in a way, but it clearly shows that maybe the triple helix model is not compatible with the inclusion of traditional knowledge holder as an actor into the process, because it doesn't talk about the public. But that's a good question.
But
Yeah.
since there is a community,
That's
the
yeah.
quadruple helix model.
Quadruple, that's what, yeah.
Will bring the experiential knowledge or traditional knowledge.
So
So indirectly that is already included in the system.
in the quadruple helix,
Yeah.
not in
Yeah.
triple helix.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the point then.
But that brings us to your presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
want to add something to this point only, how CSOs, which are civil society organizations in India, are uniquely placed in the quadruple helix model. Because what they are doing right now is that they are creating, say, they're using AI to create databases and collecting community-centric knowledge, which ties
Okay.
into the indigenous knowledge systems and knowledge interactions. For example, I am talking in the sense of climate resilient infrastructure, agriculture. So there's an organization in India called Celco. So what they have is that they have a database of all these frugal innovation practices, which they have propelled by the interaction of all the elements in the quadruple helix model. So I think there
Okay.
is a lot of space of indigenous knowledge and knowledge interaction when it comes to grassroots frugal innovation, and also CSOs, because they are heterogeneous, you can find more localized solutions, and therefore I think that is something which is gaining a lot of importance in the discourse right now.
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
all these take us to Vibhuti's lecture in a way, because all these discussions are about how to operationalize this structure to suit different context.
Yeah.
And we agree that there can be diversity in the way they function. So these actors are there, but their nature of interactions and identifying the key actors within these groups, the heterogeneity among themselves. I mean, these are very good research themes, and which we hope we will be able to do maybe in the future,
Yes.
in some way or other. Thanks.